All right, we're going to address the Mark Zuckerberg Joe Rogan interview now that I've actually watched it. Had a lot of positive feedback, comments, good discussion on the previous video I did on this. So thank you so much for all of your thoughts. And I figured I'm gonna write a newsletter article on this over the weekend, and that means I actually have to watch what's going on. So not only is it the newsletter article from Dev Leader, so Dev Leader Weekly that went out, it's also going to be the topic of the live stream on my main channel, Dev Leader. So that will be if you're watching this tonight at 7 p.m. Pacific, so it's a Monday when this is going out. So every Monday at 7 p.m. Pacific on Dev Leader, my main channel, I do a live stream. It will be based on the newsletter topic, which is going to be the Mark Zuckerberg Joe Rogan podcast interview and how AI is going to replace all the software engineers in the world, and we need to be terrified, and everything's ending, and it's the end of the world. So, if you want your questions answered, leave them in the comments or search for Dev Leader on social media. Send me a message. I have a bunch of them that I have to get back to you, so thanks so much for leaving your questions. Really appreciate it. But I figured we got to dive back into this now that I've watched the video, now that I've seen the part of the conversation. It's a 3 hour interview, so pretty intense. I haven't watched the whole thing, but I watched this segment where Joe and Mark Zuckerberg talk about this. So I'm going to give my thoughts. And spoiler alert, I feel like I was completely misled by how much fear was being raised by other people, but I get it. So I'm going to start by saying that based on what Mark said, I actually agree with a lot of what he has to say. And I think my biggest sort of difference of opinion is the timeline that he talks about. So I have a bunch of notes that I took in Notepad. This is probably the most closest to scripted code commute video you may ever see. Actually, that's not true. In the future, if I have this kind of situation, I want to take some notes. But I felt it was important because now that I've made a video on this already, I want to actually highlight some things that were said. Because I think to back up some of my perspective, I think it's important that I'm calling out specific things. Okay, so to dive into some of this, timestamp, if you're curious, is at the 2 hour, 8 minute, and 17 second mark. I recorded it here. Mark starts to get into answering Joe's question about, or the topic of AI meta this year. So he says, probably in 2025, and I appreciate all the folks that I had misheard. I thought it was in 5 years' time. It's literally in 2025. Mark Zuckerberg believes that at Meta and other similar companies, I can't speak tonight. There you go. It says we'll have an AI that's will effectively be a mid-level engineer that can write code. Okay? I believe that's achievable. I don't believe in 2025 based on all of my usage of AI, and I use AI for my own software development. I use AI for creativity tasks. I use AI for writing code. Not all of my code, but some parts of it. I cannot see that being the case unless Mark is suggesting of similar quality, not necessarily how it's integrated. But let's keep going. So he says it'll be expensive at first, makes sense, and become more efficient over time. So I agree with that statement. So far, I really just disagree with the timeline because I can't comprehend how in 2025 we could have an AI that does that. But maybe he just means the quality. So let's keep going though. A lot of the code in our apps and the AI will be built by AI engineers instead of people engineers. And I think this is probably one of the first parts where people are going, oh shit, this is scary as hell. What does that mean? I wanted to get into software development. It's the end. This is it. Stick a fork in me, I'm done. Or as the kids say these days, I'm cooked. Is that what the cool kids say? Um, so a lot of the code in our apps will be built by AI engineers, including the AI itself, instead of people engineers. Now, here's an important detail here. Mark does not say that means effectively humans will not write code anymore. That's not part of the statement. A lot of our code in our apps, or I think maybe he even says most of the code, If you think about how software development works, right? There's even, I'll give you just an example in C sharp, which is the language I use. If you watch my dev leader, my main channel, my dev leader YouTube videos for programming are all C sharp tutorials, all the programming tutorials. I've actually have a course on reflection, which is something in C and .NET that we have access to. I love using reflection for things, but reflection, if you're not familiar with this concept in .NET and C sharp, is that because it's a the language itself is like heavily reliant on types. It's an object oriented language. We can actually do like almost like a meta like I don't know querying of the code that's running and kind of inspect and operate on type information that seems kind of like unnatural normally. And so reflection is super powerful to use, but there's been advancements that actually allow for like source generators in .NET, which means that a lot of things that we used to use reflection for, where we would like sort of inspect the types and call methods based on the type, like dynamically almost, we can use source generators to literally at compile time write out a lot of the code for us. So like that's a computer writing the code. And I'm not just talking about compiling it. There's our just as another example, there are source generators for regular expressions that are literally, they will generate code that gets compiled. And the cool part about this is the source generators for these regular expressions allow you to debug how the regular expression operates. So, literally, an example of a machine writing the code that then gets compiled based on just your regular expression. So, I know that's not AI. I'm not claiming that's AI. What I'm trying to say is there's an example of a machine, not a human, writing code. Now, does that mean that all of a sudden, like, I'm obsolete? No. And even if you extrapolate this idea, this might suggest we'll see a little bit more of this, but maybe a lot of how we are operating as software developers means that we're spending less time actually typing the code into our IDEs in terms of what gets um, sort of saved into our repositories on a larger scale. So if you think about even how a lot of up and coming software developers are kind of operating, and I think tons of people are freaking out about this. You'll see things everywhere about like, oh, all the junior programmers are just, copying and pasting out of chat GPT and it's like the crappiest code I've ever seen. Like, yeah, but like if this stuff keeps getting better, maybe a lot of how we develop will be like that. And it freaks people out, right? I'm kind of sitting here laughing because like I don't know. I can certainly imagine that as all of the technology gets better, that the code that it outputs will be better. It's like a lot of us that have been, programming for, 5, 10, 15, 20 years, like we had Stack Overflow. We still have Stack Overflow. Tons of us are copying code off Stack Overflow. Doesn't mean it was the best code, right? But if you're just copying and pasting blindly, like I can get the answer on Stack Overflow, probably have to modify it for my application. It's just a little bit more exaggerated with AI. So I don't disagree with that statement either. A lot of the code in our apps and the AI will be built by AI engineers instead of people engineers. I don't read that as therefore people go away. That's not my interpretation of that statement at all. Okay. And then he goes on to say, but I don't know. I think that will augment the people working on it. So another statement by Mark where he's saying that doesn't just mean like people buy AI in, it will augment the people working on it. Now, I'll pause here for a moment because I know that because like I don't work at Meta. I don't like no affiliation with Facebook. I don't really use Facebook. I have a Facebook account. My mom will sometimes send me messages on Facebook. I have a dev leader social media page on Facebook, but like I don't really use Facebook anymore. That's kind of just what I grew up on with social media, but I don't use it anymore. So I don't like love Mark Zuckerberg. I have no reason to like, like I don't know, like be in his favor just for some other reason. I'm just the way that the things he's saying, I'm like, I don't disagree with that. But I do recognize that a lot of, and this is important when we talk about things like this on this channel, I think a lot of people see people like Mark Zuckerberg and they want to hate him for other reasons, whether that's because they don't like what he's doing with Meta, or just anything historical about Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp, like anything, or the metaverse, right? Like even in the comments on one of the other videos, I was poking fun at like, oh yeah, like this is the same guy that said the metaverse is coming, right? Like where's that at? um I think a lot of people want to just disagree, or basically take what he's saying and just automatically turn it into something that aligns with kind of their view on Mark, which is like they dislike him and they want it to be bad. So everything I'm hearing so far, I don't disagree with, except the timeline. He says people will be so much more creative and freed up to do crazy things. So he'll get into some more of this a little bit later, and I'm going to kind of summarize some of the points. But the way that I interpret that is that, like, you no longer, like, if we keep fast forwarding how this looks, you no longer, as a software developer, have to spend time doing things that can literally be done by AI, and you are freed up to do more creative, more complex things. And this is like just a pattern that we've seen. And like he literally goes on to talk about this from a farming perspective. But I was trying to think if off the top of my head, I can come up with a good example of even like automation in general, right? Or, okay, no, let's talk about a couple things. I got two that come to mind. What it, and I can't remember the site and I always forget it. Is it Dev Zero? Is that the one where you can basically prompt and it makes UIs for you for front end development? Like, oh my goodness, I am a terrible front end developer. I am horrific at front end development. It's just not for me. At least for web tech, for like WinForms and WPF, like desktop development. That's what I did for a long, long time. I'm a little bit rusty on it now, but oh my goodness, I think it's Dev Zero, right? I have it like I'm at my computer. Can I just type Dev Zero? V0.dev. Oh my god. Okay. See, like you can tell, like I don't do a lot of front end development. People are watching this probably already in the comments, like you idiot. Okay, so V0.dev, right? I have been blown away by that. But if you think about it, instead of me trying to sit there going like, I don't like I have to go look up the CSS and I hate JavaScript and like my HTML is rusty. I don't have to do that. I can basically spend time doing other things. Hey, V0, here's something I need you to do. Give me the layout for that. Thank you very much. Like I will go on to go wire these pieces up now. And if there was something else that came along was like, hey, I can wire up that V0 stuff for you, and you like, then I just go on to do other things. Like I'm still building software. And people will that you can extrapolate this and say, well, at some point you're not needed. And I'm like, well, at some point I'm doing something else. I think my mind, at least on this stuff, is by the time that AI is so effective, it can literally just replace people that are already looking for the next step in terms of being creative or doing more complex work. By the time that happens, I feel like we're getting like borderline close to singularity. Like, and we probably have other things on our mind because probably everything else is looking so different. So anyway, I still see this very much as like technology is helping, you know, move us from having to do like what I would call like mundane things. Another one that I wanted to talk about briefly that came to mind was not even about AI. And I've talked about this. Have I? I don't know if I talked about this on Code Commute, but at least on Dev Leader, I've talked about this. And this sometimes gets people a little bit triggered, but like I gotta put my disclaimers in. Bear with me for this example. For software testers, okay? So I don't currently work with software testers. I've had mixed experiences with software testers in terms of a role, but I've worked on teams with software testers where it worked very, very well. What I find does not work very well is when a software tester basically spends almost all of their time manually clicking through things. And I don't mean to like do exploratory testing or to act as a user proxy and try to feel like feel out what's been designed, if this feels good in terms of user experience. But I mean, like, literally, they're just going to like all of the inputs and, trying to hold down a key and seeing like if we're going to hit a limit or like all these overflow things. Like, when you spend so much time doing that, and then someone makes a change and you go, well, I got to test the whole thing again. And then you go through and like repeat all these things. That is, like, in my opinion, and from my experience at least, an extremely inefficient way to go about doing your job. It's not that doing it once and finding the bugs is not valuable, but in my opinion, in order to be like becoming more successful in a role like that, we should be talking about how do we make sure we never have to do that kind of stuff again, right? How do we make sure that you've made the code change to fix these? We're confident that it's going to stay fixed. How do we think about like going forward the next time we have to build another thing that looks like this? How can we actually catch this type of stuff before it even, gets sent over to testing, right? So what I'm trying to say here is that even taking a tester role and evolving it to be like less, let me click through a script of like steps to go do, like a computer can do that because it's really good at repeating things. What's more effective for a tester is not doing those manual steps repeatedly. It's being more creative about how we can have better testing strategy, how we can make sure that we're, as we go forward, not putting ourselves in these same types of situations. And like, this has nothing to do with AI. It's just an example of like, if you evolve what you're doing to automate things, doesn't mean that testers all of a sudden disappear. They can just have a lot more impact doing something related to their role that they currently have, but where there's more value. Okay, so let's keep moving along here. So if you're just curious, if you want to follow along in the Joe Rogan podcast, it's at the 2 hour, 9 minute, and 20 second mark. By the way, I don't go back and put timestamps and all that stuff in these videos. I just upload them because it's code commute. Dev leader, there's a lot more polish. That's not this channel. I just told you the timestamp. You're an adult. You can figure it out. Joe goes on to ask Mark about this fear of job elimination. And this is what everyone's worried about, right? This is what I was hearing everyone talk about from this video. So with respect to eliminating jobs, Mark says it's too early to know exactly how it plays out. I don't disagree with that. I have an opinion. I don't think that all of a sudden all the software engineering jobs just disappear because of a lot of what he said already in terms of it augmenting software engineers. So I don't think they just disappear. But he says it's too early to know exactly how it plays out. It's a very fair statement. And he then says, I think it will create more creative jobs. He doesn't say specifically that it won't reduce other jobs or the overall number of jobs. He'll kind of talk about this from like a comparison perspective in a moment, but at least creating more creative jobs. It's kind of what I was alluding to with like the testing example, right? Or even when I was saying how I use v0.dev, like not that I do much front end development at all, but when I have to, I'm freed up to go do other parts of the development. So I can be more creative instead of like, I have an idea of what I want to build. I can't remember the syntax. I have to go look up this thing. Like, how do I center a div? Like all this kind of stuff. I don't have to worry about that. So I'm freed up to do more creative things. So I totally agree with that statement. He believes it will create more creative jobs. This is where he gets into his example about some of the historical stuff. And I didn't write out everything he said, but the gist of it, he's like, I can't remember at what point in history, but he's like, basically, at some point in human history, there's a lot more time where majority of people were farming. Okay, so more people proportionally are farming and spending a ton of time doing it. And this is kind of like a basic thing that had to happen so that we would just have food, right? So a lot of people are farming and there's a ton of time spent farming. So he's like, we're doing this out of necessity. But then he goes on to say, like, we introduce industrial processes and things like that. and things kind of evolved. And he's like, now like 2% of society are farmers. Okay, so we basically can get all of the food that we need to sustain ourselves, and like 2% of society are farmers. Now, if you stop there and you think like just with that statement, it's like, well, that's just like the software engineers. Like, we just become obsolete, right? Like, isn't that the proof? But that's not it. It's like the things that we had to do out of necessity are going away. And so if you aren't, I don't know, in my opinion, if you're not thinking a little bit more, I don't know, high level. I don't mean for that to be insulting to people, but like if you only see that as therefore elimination of the people in software engineering, and there's nothing beyond that, then I'm like, I don't know if you're like thinking through this exactly. But let's keep going. Um, he goes on to say, in general, I don't think people will work as many hours. I don't think people work as many hours right now as they do compared to the farmer days. Now, some people, especially like in the US, right, we're all like, hey, man, we got to work like 80-hour weeks and like it's all terrible. And like, I hear you, but I think he means that like the average person, uh, in comparing it to like farm days where everyone's farming, we don't have to work proportionally as many hours, as many days of the week in total, right, to be able to get by. I realize that some people hearing that, I can already imagine the comments that are going to come in from this, but like, I don't disagree with that. Okay. He thinks that this trend will continue. So he's using that as an analogy to AI. Okay. So, like, being able to industrialize is kind of like another analogy to AI. So, um, he says the hours required to work will continue to shrink. That's his expectation over time, and that more people, there will be more focus on things like artistic, cultural pursuits. And I think he's not talking specifically just about software engineers. He's talking about like society. Okay. Then he goes on to say those that are super engaged. So the people like the software engineers in this case that are super engaged will be able to accomplish way more than ever before due to unimaginable leverages that we'll have, right, from the technology. So what he's saying is that as a necessity to survive and to get by, you will have to work less, just like compared to when we had to farm to have all of our food. And this is his analogy, just for the record. It's not my analogy. You have to work less just to survive, and that frees you up to do other types of things. This is why we have all of the different roles and the technology that we have today, because the people were freed up to do these other things. So he's saying if you lower the amount of work that you have to do to get by, you have more opportunity for artistic and cultural pursuits. I don't disagree with that. But then he goes on to say that the people that are super engaged, so if you want to stay like investing more time into work or proportionally the same and not go pursue those things like artistic and cultural pursuits, if you're like, hey, in this example, I'm the software engineer, I want to work and I want to do software building, that's what I want to do. He says, this is my interpretation of his statements, right? Will be super engaged, will be able to accomplish way more than ever before due to unimaginable leverage. So I interpret that as all of the AI advancements and tooling that we'll have will enable people that are interested in building software to have such extreme leverage because it's so beneficial. So, does this obsolete people? Because he tries to clarify, right? He's like, so this seems like something that people are latching onto, right? He says, at every step along the way in technology advancements, people always thought this would happen. So every time there's a big change in technology, people panic and they go, oh no, like we're about to be obsolete. And he's like, it hasn't happened so far. Like there have been new jobs that get created. Now, I just realized I said that, and people are going to say, well, what about this example? Sure, you have an example. Thank you for sharing it in the comments. I appreciate it. But the point is that, like, as a whole, technology changes. It's not just like everyone's jobs disappear. It doesn't just work like that. It hasn't worked like that historically. And Mark says, will that be different this time? Is this the one that's different? He's like, could be, but like he doesn't see that being the case. And I agree. I don't see that being the case either. So I think what I was saying in the previous video that I made on this was like, if I'm making assumptions about what Mark said, because I hadn't seen it, then I'm like, I disagree with those statements. I don't think that, um, people, I don't think it's going to happen. I said in 5 years, but in 2025 in this case. Um, but as I heard what Mark was saying after I watched it, I'm like, I agree with a lot of what he has to say. I do not interpret Mark's comments as saying, hey, look, we're about to go fire all the software engineers, or we're going to stop hiring software engineers because we don't need them. I think the role will continue to evolve over time. I've been saying that over and over. So I still stand by that. I think that people will be able to leverage AI more effectively. It'll be more advanced, it'll be more powerful. I believe that we'll have more AI doing code writing for us. It's already happening, right? It's already the juniors, the terrible juniors that don't know how to program, just copying and pasting. It's already happening. There's more AI putting code into our code bases. You might not like that, but the reason I'm laughing at this is because like I think it's only going to get better. So like it might be kind of rough right now. So, and I'm still laughing and kind of picturing like some of the code that I've seen like ChatGPT and stuff spit out. So it's like I get it. I get where the frustration comes from, but if the technology continues to advance and it can output quality code like a mid-level engineer, yeah, copy and paste that in. Let's go massage it, make it work. I was doing this for years off Stack Overflow. Most of us were. Most of us are. So I don't see that as I don't know, something to be afraid of. So those are my thoughts after watching the podcast. I realize that, um, I think probably I said it in the other video, like people are going to be pissed off. Like I can't wait for the comments on this or the downvotes and stuff. That's my take on it. So I think you'll find if you watch the other video or if you've already seen the other one that my perspective remains aligned with what I said before. I didn't change my mind. Where my mind is changed is based on what Mark actually said. Like I thought that he was saying it's going to replace software engineers, but that's not the take I got. So the overall stance I have is the same. So that's my thoughts. I want to recognize that I know people are still afraid, and I don't really know what to do anymore aside from just continuing to share that like things are going to change. I don't see software engineering going away, and I think that it will continue to get more and more creative. Um, I think one of the points, if I don't think I've mentioned it in this video, but I said it in some comments. I think that people don't recognize that, especially if you're very new to the industry, there is so much work to get done. Like ridiculous amounts of work to get done. I've never managed engineering teams where there hasn't been like a stupid backlog of stuff we got to get done. There's only so many people, so much time, and we got to keep moving. If I could scale teams to some degree, I would be trying to do that, right? If there were budget for it, if I, could scale out and make sure that I had like the right structures that worked well, like I would absolutely be doing that if it meant we could get more done. But like there isn't budget for it, or sometimes it's not the right things. We do with what we have and we make it work. We just cut out like you have to prioritize stuff and cut out things that can't fit. So in my head, I'm thinking if this pans out the way that I'm hearing Mark talk about it, I'm like, okay, we basically have the ability to be so much more productive. I'm like, Hell yeah. I think people hear this and they're like, that means people are going to, like, the people that run the companies are just going to trim out the developers. Like, they don't need them anymore. Or they'll stop hiring them. And I'm like, why would they stop hiring them? We need people to do the work. We can have them augmented with AI to do even more. Like, so anyway, I think that's why I have that perspective. That's why I wanted to share it. It's like I see it as a not replacement, but as an augmentation. And I think a lot of people are freaking out because they're like, it's a replacement. If you disagree with that, that's totally fine. You can debate me in the comments on it, but like you're not going to change my mind, and that's okay if I'm not going to change yours. That's totally fine. My goal is that for the people that are that they're afraid because they're not familiar with how the industry works, and they're like, I just need other perspectives to kind of balance this stuff out. That is mine. I don't know if people are hearing that a lot. I feel like most people are probably hearing this perspective that's like it will just replace engineers, and kind of fuels, like, perpetuates that fear. So I'm hoping to share some other perspective that might not be out there as much. And that's my honest take on it. So I hope that helps. But that's my take on the Joe Rogan, Mark Zuckerberg podcast. So thanks so much for watching. Remember to check out my main channel, Dev Leader, for the live stream. That's every Monday night at 7 p.m. Pacific. If you're watching this on the day it was released, that means the live stream is this evening. If you've missed it and you're watching this at some point in the future, it's recorded on my main channel, so you can check that out. And of course, if you have more questions, leave them in the comments below. I'm happy to get back and answer them for you. And if you want to send something with more detail, keep it anonymous. Look for Dev Leader on social media, and I would be happy to try and answer your question. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time. Take care.